You have until 5 o'clock to clear your office, Elliot said. Security will escort you to your car. Vanessa Holt did not flinch. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind so many times over the past 4 months that hearing the actual words felt almost distant, like watching a movie she had already seen. She kept her hands folded on the conference table, her expression calm, while 11 people sat around her pretending not to stare. Elliot Marsh, her husband of 7 years. The man who had kissed her forehead that very morning before she left for the gym. He sat at the opposite end of the table in his charcoal suit, his jaw set, his eyes already moving past her to the agenda on his tablet. On what grounds? Vanessa asked quietly. Conflict of interest, misuse of executive authority, it's all documented. He slid a folder down the length of the table. It stopped 3 chairs short of her. Nobody moved to pass it along. Across from her, Tamsin Gould, the company's director of brand partnerships, glanced away the moment Vanessa looked at her. Tamsin had been sleeping with Elliot for the past 14 months. Vanessa had found out 11 weeks ago. She had not said a word. I'd like to review the documentation before I respond to anything, Vanessa said. Of course. Elliot's voice was polite, the way someone is polite to a stranger they are not interested in. You have until 5. She looked at him one last time. This man she had supported through 2 failed business launches before Hargrove Luxury Hotels finally took off. This man whose mother she had sat with in a hospital waiting room for 6 hours the night of the stroke. This man who had once told her she was the only person who made him feel like he was enough. I understand, Vanessa said. She picked up the folder, stood without rushing, and walked out of the room. The offices of Hargrove Luxury Hotels occupied the top 2 floors of a glass building in Midtown Atlanta. Vanessa had worked here for 9 years, first as director of operations, then as vice president. When Elliot was named CEO 4 years ago, she had restructured her own role to avoid any appearance of impropriety. She had been careful. She had always been careful. Her assistant, a young woman named Deja, was standing near the printer when Vanessa came out of the conference room. Deja looked at her with wide eyes and pressed her lips together in a way that said she already knew. I'm going to need about 45 minutes, Vanessa said. I'll hold everything, Deja said softly. Vanessa went to her office and closed the door. She sat down at her desk and allowed herself exactly 60 seconds to feel it. The humiliation, the grief, the very particular pain of being betrayed by someone you chose. She pressed her palms flat against the desk surface and breathed. Then she opened her laptop and sent one email. Subject line, ready when you are. The reply came back in under 2 minutes. We'll be in position by morning. She closed the laptop, pulled a single box from her closet shelf and began placing items into it with unhurried deliberateness. A photograph of her and her college roommate at graduation. A small succulent she'd had for 3 years. A legal pad with notes she didn't actually need but wanted to look like she was taking. She left behind everything that mattered. She'd moved those items 3 weeks ago. A few things at a time, carried in her gym bag and her oversized tote. Nobody noticed. Nobody was paying attention to Vanessa in the way they used to. That was the thing about being underestimated. It made you invisible in all the most useful ways. A security guard named Robert, she remembered his name because she had attended his daughter's going to college party 2 summers ago, appeared at her office door looking deeply uncomfortable. Mrs. Marsh, he said. It's Holt, she said pleasantly, but don't worry about it. I'm ready, Robert. He walked her to the elevator. She smiled at the people who looked up. Some looked away. A few gave her something with their eyes that she recognized. Solidarity held at a safe distance. The expression of people who knew something wrong was happening but had mortgages and didn't know yet how the story would end. The elevator doors closed. Vanessa set her box on the passenger seat of her car and sat in the parking garage for a moment. She took out her phone and called her father's attorney. It happened, she said when he picked up. How'd he look? Martin Ossie asked, very confident. Good. She could hear him already pulling up documents on his computer. The trust petition is filed. Emergency shareholder meeting is set for 7 a.m. tomorrow. The 3 independent board members have already been briefed. Elliot will receive formal notification by 9 tonight. And the financial irregularities. The forensic accountant finished her report this afternoon. 18 months of vendor overcharges funneled through a shell company Elliot co-owns with a third party. It's clean, it's documented, and the SEC referral goes out tomorrow morning alongside the board notification. Vanessa exhaled slowly. Martin, thank you for everything. Your father asked me to look after you, he said. I'm keeping my promise. She drove to her friend Petra's house where she had been staying for the past 3 weeks. She could not have stayed in the house she shared with Elliot. She could not have continued that particular performance indefinitely. Petra Ames had been Vanessa's closest friend since their first year at Howard University, when they had been assigned to adjacent rooms in the freshman dormitory and had argued passionately about the same novel for 40 minutes, before realizing they agreed on everything that mattered. Petra was now a pediatric cardiologist with a 4-bedroom house in Decatur, and a gift for knowing when to pour wine and when to make tea instead. She made tea. "How do you feel?" Petra asked, sitting across from Vanessa at the kitchen island. "Like I've been holding my breath for 4 months and I still can't exhale." "Tomorrow you can exhale. Tomorrow I have to be sharp." "You've been sharp. You're going to be sharp." Petra wrapped both hands around her mug. "What did he say when he fired you?" "Nothing memorable. He was very professional about it." Vanessa set her own mug down. "That's the thing that gets me. He wasn't angry, he wasn't guilty, he was just efficient, like I was a scheduling problem he'd finally resolved." Petra was quiet for a moment. "Elliot was always more interested in the version of you that made him look good. When you started outgrowing that frame you became inconvenient." Vanessa had thought about this. She had thought about it a great deal over the past 11 weeks, lying awake in Petra's guest room while the ceiling stayed dark and still above her. She had found out about Tamsin the same way most people found out, by accident, then all at once. She had borrowed Elliot's personal laptop to print a boarding pass when hers wouldn't connect to the printer. She had not been looking for anything, she hadn't needed to look. The messages were right there, organized in a thread going back over a year, warm and specific in the way that only real intimacy ever sounds. She had printed her boarding pass, she had closed the laptop, she had gone upstairs and stood in the shower for a long time, and then she had called Martin O.C. Martin had been her father's lawyer and most trusted advisor for over 2 decades. When Clarence Holt died 4 years ago, a heart attack at 61 too fast and too soon, Martin had handled the estate. He had sat with Vanessa for 3 hours in his office 2 weeks after the funeral and explained every provision of her father's will in careful detail. There was one provision she had not fully understood at the time. Clarence Holt had built his hospitality consulting firm from a single contract in 1993. By the time Elliot Marsh came along, charming, ambitious, full of ideas that Vanessa's father funded and Vanessa's relationships helped place, the Holt family held a foundational stake in what eventually became Hargrove Luxury Hotels. When the company incorporated and went private, Clarence had structured his estate carefully. On paper he had gifted Vanessa and Elliot equal shares as a wedding present. In reality he had placed Vanessa's shares, 51% of the company's founding equity, into a revocable trust with a specific clause. If Vanessa were ever removed from her executive role without cause, or if documented evidence of financial misconduct by the controlling partner was presented to the board, the trust would transfer full voting control to her immediately. Martin had explained this to her the morning after she found the emails. "Your father didn't entirely trust Elliot," Martin had said simply. "He trusted your judgment about people, but he also knew that love makes us generous in ways that aren't always strategic. He built a trapdoor," Vanessa had said. "He built you a foundation. You just have to be patient enough to let someone walk off the edge on their own." So she had been patient. She had gone back to work. She had attended the same meetings, reviewed the same reports, smiled at Tamsin in the hallways with the same professional warmth she extended to everyone. She had hired a forensic accountant through Martin's firm without telling Elliot. She had waited. She had known Elliot would eventually try to push her out. He had grown bolder over the past year, interrupting her in board presentations, routing decisions through Tamsin that should have come through Vanessa's department, quietly repositioning Tamsin as his operational right hand. He was building a structure that didn't include his wife. He had just forgotten to check who owned the building. Vanessa arrived at Hargrove Luxury Hotels the following morning at 6:45. She wore the navy wrap dress her father had bought her when she made vice president. She had not worn it since his funeral and she was wearing it today deliberately, for reasons she didn't need to explain to anyone. The front desk staff looked uncertain when she came through the doors. "Mrs. Marsh," the morning receptionist began. "Holt," Vanessa said. "Please check your inbox. There should be updated access clearance from the board administrator." The receptionist checked. His expression shifted. "Of course, Miss Holt. Good morning." She took the elevator to the executive floor. The boardroom was already populated. 3 independent directors she recognized, Martin seated near the head of the table with a calm that came from decades of doing exactly this kind of work, and 2 members of the company's legal team who had been retained by the board, not by Elliot, for this specific meeting. Vanessa took a seat at the head of the table. At 7:12 Elliot arrived. She saw him through the glass wall before he saw her. He was walking with his usual long stride, already on his phone, the expression of a man who has woken up and found the world still organized to his satisfaction. Tamsin was not with him. The notification sent to Elliot the night before had specified that the meeting concerned executive leadership, and that no non-board personnel were permitted to attend. He saw the conference room. He stopped walking. He ended his call. He opened the door. "What is this?" he said. His voice carried the edge of a man who is asking a question he already suspects he won't like the answer to. "Sit down, Elliot," Vanessa said. "I don't take direction from." He stopped. He looked at the faces around the table. He looked at Martin. Something reorganized itself behind his eyes. He sat. Martin stood. "Mr. Marsh, I represent the estate of Clarence Holt and, by extension, the Holt Family Trust, which holds controlling interest in Hargrove Luxury Hotels. Yesterday afternoon, when you terminated Ms. Holt's employment without cause and without board authorization, you triggered the activating clause of that trust. Effective as of 6 a.m. this morning, full voting control of the trust's 51% equity stake has transferred to Vanessa Holt." He set a document in front of Elliot. "This is the trust certification. You are welcome to have your attorney review it." Elliot looked at the document. Then he looked at Vanessa. "This isn't real," he said. "The board has already reviewed it," said Carolyn Stith, one of the independent directors. "Along with the forensic report on the vendor discrepancies. We've been in contact with the SC. You planned this." Elliot's voice had gone quiet. "You let me fire you. You let me go through the whole thing, and you already had this." "I had it for 4 months," Vanessa said. "Since the night I found your messages with Tamsin on your laptop." The silence in the room was extraordinary. "I want you to understand something," Vanessa continued. "I didn't do this to humiliate you. I did this because you stole from a company my father built. Because you manipulated people who trusted your leadership. Because you spent a year constructing a version of this company that had no place for me in it, and you thought I wouldn't notice, and you thought I wouldn't do anything about it, even if I did." She folded her hands on the table. "You underestimated me. That's not something I can forgive, but it is something you'll have to live with." Martin addressed the table. "I'm calling for a board vote on the immediate removal of Elliot Marsh as CEO, pending the outcome of the SEC investigations and subject to further legal proceedings." The vote was 4-0. Elliot abstained, which did not matter. "You are hereby removed as CEO of Hargrove Luxury Hotels, effective immediately," Martin said. "Please surrender your access credentials and company devices to legal counsel. Security will escort you from the building." Elliot did not argue. He looked for the first time since Vanessa had known him genuinely small, not sad. She didn't think he had arrived at sad yet, but reduced, like a coat that had been hung on a very tall hook, and someone had just lowered the hook. He looked at her one more time as he stood. "I didn't think you had it in you," he said. "I know," Vanessa said. "That was always your real mistake." She watched through the glass as security met him in the hallway. He walked to his office, spent less than 10 minutes inside, and came out carrying nothing. He did not look at anyone. The elevator doors closed behind him, and Elliot Marsh left Hargrove Luxury Hotels for the last time. Vanessa sat in the boardroom for a moment after everyone else had begun moving, just breathing. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Atlanta was waking up. Traffic thickened on the streets below. Somewhere in the building, people were arriving for their regular shifts, making coffee, opening laptops, beginning an ordinary Tuesday with no idea that by 9 a.m. everything would be different. She thought about her father. She thought about the way he used to stand at the window of whatever hotel lobby they were visiting. He had taken her along on client trips, starting when she was 9 or 10, and study the way the space functioned. Not the aesthetics, the movement, the flow. Who was going where, how quickly, whether the energy in the room felt welcoming or merely decorative. "Hospitality is just another word for respect," he had told her once. "Every person who walks out through those doors deserves to feel like someone thought about them before they arrived." She had tried to build that into everything she did here. She would keep trying. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Petra. "Tell me everything." Vanessa smiled and typed back, "Come to dinner tonight, I'll tell you in person." The weeks that followed were not simple. They were not the triumphant movie montage Petra had cheerfully predicted. They were long and technical and exhausting in the way that real rebuilding always is. The SEC investigation moved quickly, given how thoroughly Martin's forensic accountant had documented everything. Elliot had been routing funds through a vendor company he co-owned with a silent partner, an old friend from his MBA program, for a period of 22 months. The total came to just over $1.3 million. His attorney negotiated, then negotiated again, then stopped negotiating when it became clear the documentation was airtight. Tamsin resigned the week after Elliot was removed. Vanessa did not ask her to. Tamsin left a brief letter with HR and cleaned out her office over a weekend. Vanessa heard through the office that she had taken a position at a smaller firm in Charlotte. She did not think about Tamsin much. There was too much else to think about. The harder work was internal. Vanessa called a company-wide meeting in the first week. Not a memo, not a town hall webcast. An actual meeting, in the largest conference room, with all 3 shifts represented as best as possible given scheduling realities. "I'm not going to pretend the past few years were normal," she said, standing at the front of the room with no slides, no podium. Some of you experienced things under previous leadership that you should not have had to experience. Some of you were ignored or talked over or made to feel that your contributions didn't matter. I want to say clearly that I know this happened, and I take responsibility for not seeing it sooner." She paused. "We are going to do things differently. I need you to tell me how, not through suggestion boxes and quarterly surveys, but directly, to me and to leadership you trust. My door is open." That is not a figure of speech. There was a stillness in the room afterward that she recognized. The stillness of people who have been given something they weren't expecting and aren't sure yet whether to trust it. They would see. She would show them. She promoted 3 people in the first month. Her chief financial officer was an internal candidate named Wesley Drummond who had spent 4 years watching Elliot override his analyses, and had simply quietly kept doing excellent work anyway. Her new head of operations was a woman named Blythe Okafor who had been managing the company's 2 highest-performing properties from a director role for 7 years without ever being considered for a VP position. "Why now?" Blythe had asked in her offer meeting, not suspiciously, just directly. "Because you were always qualified and I should have moved faster," Vanessa said. "I'm moving now." The board reconfirmed Vanessa's position as CEO and majority shareholder by unanimous vote. The company retained an independent ethics firm to review all HR practices and vendor contracts. It was expensive and time-consuming and surfaced 3 additional situations that needed to be addressed, and Vanessa addressed all of them. The property that needed her most direct attention was the flagship Atlanta location, where Elliot had centralized most of his damage. She spent 2 days a week there for the first 2 months, not in the executive suite but on the floor, walking the rooms, eating in the restaurant, sitting in the lobby and watching the way the space felt. Her father's approach. She found 6 things she wanted to change within the first week and made herself wait 30 days before changing any of them, to make sure she was seeing the property clearly rather than just differently. Her divorce attorney was a woman named Harriet Voss, who described herself as methodical, which turned out to mean she was the kind of lawyer who made opposing counsel tired just by being thorough. Vanessa had a prenuptial agreement, which Elliot's attorney tried to challenge on the grounds that it had been drafted before the full value of her family's equity position in Hargrove was disclosed. Harriet dispatched this argument in 11 pages of response that she seemed to have enjoyed writing. "Your husband is going to walk away with the lake house and his personal investment accounts," Harriet told Vanessa over the phone after Elliot's side agreed to terms. "He's going to walk away with no claim on Hargrove equity, no ongoing spousal support, and a signed agreement not to disparage the company publicly while any legal matters remain pending. Will he honor that? Probably not in private, but publicly yes. He doesn't have the leverage to do anything else." The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in March, on a day when Vanessa had 2 property reviews and a board call scheduled. She signed the paperwork at 8 in the morning in Harriet's office, shook Harriet's hand and went directly to work. Petra texted at noon, "Are you okay?" Vanessa answered honestly, "I feel like I've been sick for a long time and today the fever finally broke." The criminal case moved on a parallel track. The U.S. Attorney's Office filed charges against Elliot and his MBA friend, whose name Vanessa had learned was Dennis Brower, in April. Dennis cooperated immediately and received a reduced charge in exchange for testimony. Elliot held out longer, which his attorney eventually convinced him was not in his interest given the cooperation agreement already in place. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud in June. Sentencing was scheduled for the fall. The victim impact statement was something Vanessa had not expected to find difficult. She had been steady through so much, but sitting down to write it, she kept stopping. Not because she didn't know what to say, because she had to decide how much of herself she was willing to give to this particular moment. She wrote it simply in the end. 2 pages. She described what the company had meant to her father and what it meant to her. She described the specific texture of sitting in a boardroom, being fired by someone she had loved while 11 people watched and said nothing. She described the employees who had been harmed and the work that still remained to repair what had been broken. She did not write about anger, because she had moved past anger. She wrote about accountability, because that was the only thing that served any purpose. At sentencing, the judge gave Elliot 26 months, below federal guidelines but above what his attorneys had argued for. He would report to a minimum security facility in Georgia. He would pay restitution of $1.3 million plus penalties over a period to be determined by the court. His professional licenses in financial services were revoked. Vanessa was not in the courtroom for sentencing. She sent Harriet to observe and got a text summary afterward. She read it in her car in the parking deck of the Atlanta flagship property, where she had been spending the afternoon reviewing the renovation proposals for the restaurant space. She sat with the information for a moment. Then she put her phone in her bag and went back inside to finish her meeting. Elliot's chapter was closed. She had work to do. What she had not anticipated, what no one had warned her about, though perhaps they couldn't have, was how much grief there was underneath the victory. Not grief for Elliot. She had largely grieved that relationship during the 4 months she'd spent preparing for its end, allowing herself to understand what it had actually been rather than what she had believed it to be. But grief for the version of herself who had believed in it so completely, who had rearranged her own ambitions to fit around someone else's, who had been careful and generous and faithful and had received in return very careful and very deliberate deception. Her therapist, a pragmatic woman named Dr. Adaeze Okonkwo, who specialized in high-stakes professional women going through personal upheaval, had a way of sitting with silence that Vanessa found more useful than most talking. The betrayal of a partner is one thing, Dr. Okonkwo said during one session, about 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, but you were also betrayed professionally. In a space your father built. That's a compounding injury. It makes sense that it takes longer to process than you expected. I keep thinking I should feel more settled by now, Vanessa said. The legal things are resolved. The company is doing better. I'm sleeping. You survived something that required you to be strategic and contained for 4 months. That kind of sustained emotional suppression has costs. You're paying them now, which is correct. There's nothing wrong with the timing. She had started running in the mornings, something she hadn't done since her early 30s. She had taken a long weekend in Savannah with Petra and spent most of it walking and not talking about work. She had cooked, badly at first, and then gradually with more confidence. Something she had always said she didn't have time for. She was learning, slowly, what she liked when there was no one else's preferences to arrange herself around. The company's numbers improved steadily through the summer and into the fall. Revenue at the Atlanta flagship increased 17% after the restaurant renovation and a revised events program Blythe had designed. The smaller property in Nashville, which had been chronically underperforming under Elliot's neglect, turned its first profitable quarter in 3 years. At the annual leadership summit in October, Vanessa stood before 43 managers and directors and talked for 20 minutes without notes about what kind of company she wanted Hargrove to be. Not the largest. Not the most globally recognized. The most trusted. The place guests returned to because they felt genuinely cared for, and the place employees stayed because they felt genuinely valued. My father believed that excellence and integrity were the same thing, she said. Not related, the same. You cannot do this work well without doing it honestly. That is what we are building. The applause was real. She could feel the difference between applause that is given to a speaker and applause that is given to an idea. After the summit she sat with Wesley and Blythe and 2 of the property directors until 9 in the evening, talking through the next year's strategy. It was the kind of meeting that would have exhausted her a year ago. It energized her instead. She walked out to the parking lot afterward and stood for a moment in the October air, thinking about nothing in particular. Her phone showed a missed call from a number she didn't recognize, voicemail attached. She listened. Vanessa. It's Elliot. His voice was careful, practiced. I'm reporting next week. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I know you don't need to hear that, and I know it doesn't change anything, but I wanted to say it. What I did to the company, what I did to us. I had something real and I didn't know how to deserve it. A pause. I hope you're okay. I hope things are good. That's all I wanted to say. Vanessa stood in the parking lot for another minute after the message ended. Then she deleted the voicemail and drove home. There was nothing she owed Elliot, not acknowledgement, not forgiveness, not even the courtesy of a response. He was going to carry what he'd done regardless of whether she said anything about it. Her silence was not cruelty. It was simply the truth that she no longer had anything to say to him. He had made himself irrelevant to her life, and the most honest thing she could do was treat him accordingly. She poured a glass of wine when she got home and sat on her balcony for a while looking at the city. She thought about her father, the way she still often did in quiet moments. She thought about the trust he had built so carefully, the faith he had placed in her judgment even while also protecting her from her own optimism. She thought about what it meant to be loved by someone who saw you clearly, who knew you were capable and also knew you were human, and had quietly arranged things so that your humanity would never be used to destroy you. She missed him profoundly. She was also, she realized, no longer afraid that she couldn't carry what he had left her. 18 months after Elliot was removed, Hargrove Luxury Hotels was named to a regional best practices list for workplace culture. Blythe Okafor was profiled in a hospitality trade publication. Wesley's revised financial controls became a case study. The company's outside auditors shared with 2 other client firms as an example of restructured oversight done correctly. Vanessa hired 12 new employees and promoted 9 internal ones. She launched a partnership with a local culinary school that placed students in paid apprenticeships, at 3 of the company's food and beverage programs. She sat on 2 nonprofit boards and found she was good at it. She was also slowly learning to trust people again. Not naively, she had moved past naive, but deliberately, choosing to extend trust as an act of will rather than an act of hope. There was a man named James, a commercial real estate attorney she had met at a board dinner, who had made her laugh 3 times in the span of 20 minutes, and then apologized for monopolizing her attention, and gone to talk to someone else. She had appreciated both things. They had exchanged cards at the end of the evening, and he had not contacted her for 2 weeks, and when he did, it was a simple, direct question. Would you want to have dinner sometime? She had said yes. They had dinner, then another dinner, then a Sunday afternoon at a museum, followed by coffee that lasted until closing time. It was slow and careful and full of conversation. He asked her questions and waited for the actual answers. He talked about his work and his family with the ease of someone who had thought about who he was and had arrived at a version he was comfortable with. He had no interest in being impressive, he was just interested. You seem like someone who's been through something significant, he said to her over dinner one evening, not intrusively, just observationally. I have, she said. Do you want to talk about it? Not tonight, she said, but I will eventually. I'm not keeping it from you. I just want a few more dinners where it's just this. That's completely fair, he said, and moved on to something else without any detectable performance of understanding. She had told Petra about James cautiously. The way you tell someone about something you don't want to jinx. He sounds like an adult, Petra said. He really does, Vanessa said. It's remarkable. 2 years after the morning Elliot had told her she had until 5 o'clock to clear her office, Vanessa Holt stood at the window of her corner office on the 14th floor of a building her father had believed in before anyone else did, looking out at a city that was still moving, still building, still becoming. She was not the person she had been 2 years ago. She was not better in every way. She was less trusting in certain reflexive ways. She was still learning to examine, still startled sometimes by how much she had not seen, but she was clearer about what she wanted, about what she would accept, about the difference between generosity and self-erasure. Hargrove was thriving, her team was good, her father's legacy was intact and growing in directions he might have imagined on his best days. Elliot had been released from federal custody 3 months ago. She had received a notification through her attorney, as required by the legal agreement, and had noted the information and moved on. She did not know where he was or what he was doing, and found that she did not particularly want to know. Tamsin was somewhere in the southeast, she had heard, working in events management. Vanessa had no feelings about this. She had James, and Petra, and her work, and the slow, pleasant discovery of what her life looked like, when she stopped arranging it around someone else's needs, and started asking honestly what she wanted it to hold. She had her father's trust. Not just the legal document, but the thing underneath it. The knowledge that he had looked at her clearly and believed she was strong enough to bear it. She intended to keep proving him right. The city stretched out below her, glass and steel and early morning light already full of motion. Somewhere in it, 11 people who had sat in that conference room 2 years ago and watched her be fired were beginning their Tuesday. Some of them worked here still, some had moved on. Vanessa turned from the window and went to her desk. She had a 9 o'clock with Blythe and a call with the Nashville property at 11. And she was already thinking about both, already running the threads in her mind with the ease of someone who has stopped waiting for permission to lead. She opened her laptop. The day began.